Amid family secrets and silent conspiracies, a woman from the past returns unrecognized. But this time she's not here to ask for help. She's here to protect the one who once saved her life, and she won't let anyone take what's rightfully hers. Welcome to the channel. Before we begin, hit like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this. The sun was barely rising over the fields of blue agave at Crossley Valley Ranch when Catherine Morgan Hamilton, contrary to her usual habits, decided to walk discreetly along the paths leading to the stables. Mornings had become quieter since Alexander, her husband and patriarch of the most powerful business dynasty in Kentucky, began delegating much of his responsibilities in the administration of the family distillery. Though justifiable for health reasons, this left her uneasy. That morning, her uneasiness took physical form when she glimpsed, through an opening between the garden trees, Ryan Wilson, the ranch's head of security, a notoriously reserved man, teaching her young son Sebastian to ride a horse with unexpected gentleness. The scene, though touching, awakened something more than tenderness inside her. Ryan had never shown interest in the family's children, nor had he become involved in personal matters with the Hamiltons. What had changed? And why now, at a time of delicate transition at the ranch, was he assuming such closeness? Concealing her presence, Catherine approached close enough to catch the conversation. Among simple riding instructions, she heard a phrase whispered with too much weight to be casual. You need to learn to protect those you love, even from those everyone considers heroes. From that moment, something inside her broke. That statement, delivered with such restraint, carried a tone of warning. She knew that man never spoke in vain. Thus began her search for answers, a search that would slowly reveal irreparable cracks in the legacy of the man with whom she had shared her life for more than 2 decades. The first significant event came to light when reviewing old security records and internal movements at the ranch. Catherine discovered that, months before Alexander assumed full control of the family business, there was a suspicious alteration in the security staff chain of command, orchestrated by Ryan himself. What at the time seemed like a simple reorganization now emerged as a possible cover-up for something bigger. Determined to understand what really lay behind those decisions, she began to question, with subtlety and intelligence, the oldest employees: gardeners, cooks, maids. One of them, already retired, revealed an episode that had never been officially documented. One night, shortly before Alexander took the reins of the family business, someone was discreetly removed from one of the inner wings of the ranch, under Ryan's direct escort. Catherine, though trained for diplomatic discretion, as the wife of the most influential man in the region, knew she was touching on something dangerous. But there was a visceral need to discover the truth. So she discreetly sought out Ernest, Alexander's older brother, who had been removed from the business succession for behavioral reasons, but was known for his sharp memory and loyalty to the Hamilton family values. The conversation with Ernest took place in the old Hamilton vacation home on the outskirts of Bourbon Springs, away from the indiscreet ears of the main ranch. I'm not surprised that after so long, the shadows of the past begin to lengthen. Catherine, Ernest said as he poured 2 cups of strong coffee, you've been living in a house built on quicksand. Catherine maintained her composure, though she felt that every word from her brother-in-law confirmed her worst suspicions. Speak clearly, Ernest. If you know something about my husband that I should know, now is the time. The man looked at her steadily, as if assessing to what extent she was prepared to hear the truth. Finally, he sighed deeply. Did you never wonder why I was the one who stepped away from the business, being the firstborn? Why I accepted without resistance that my younger brother would take what was rightfully mine? Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She had always assumed that Ernest preferred a more bohemian life, away from business responsibilities. Now, the revelation she was about to hear would forever change her perception of the Hamilton dynasty. The night before our father was to officially announce who would take the reins of the business, something happened in the ranch library, Ernest continued. Charles Sullivan, the family's legal advisor and my father's close friend, had discovered irregularities in some contracts signed by Alexander. contracts that seriously compromised the future of the company. Catherine listened attentively, connecting this new information with the episode the retired employee had told her about. "What happened to Charles?" she asked, fearing the answer. "Officially, he resigned and moved to Colorado. Unofficially." Ernest left the sentence hanging in the air. "What I do know is that same night, Ryan Wilson entered my father's office with a folder. The next day I was summoned to hear that, for the good of the family, I should yield my place to Alexander." The weight of those words fell on Catherine like a stone. Had her husband been the architect of such an elaborate manipulation? And what role did Ryan play in all this? The most disturbing thing was the current situation. Her little Sebastian was apparently being prepared by the same man who had helped hide his father's secrets. "There's more, Catherine," added Ernest. "Alexander's position was never legitimate. The succession was manipulated after Charles threatened to make the scandal public. My brother only escaped the consequences thanks to Ryan's blind loyalty, who altered evidence and assumed control of ranch security from then on." This revelation generated the first big surprise. Alexander was not just a moral usurper, but a direct beneficiary of a lie that over the years had been camouflaged under the stability of his business management. Catherine then faced a deep ethical conflict. Exposing the truth meant crumbling the image of a man who, despite everything, had guaranteed prosperity to the family and the region. Remaining silent, on the other hand, would mean complicity with a farce that now threatened the internal balance of the Hamilton family itself. "Who else knows this story?" she finally asked. Ernest's answer left her cold. "More people than you imagine, and I believe someone is preparing the ground for everything to come to light." Upon returning to the ranch, Catherine observed every corner, every face, with new eyes. The century-old walls that once gave her security now seemed to hide secrets in every crack. The employees who greeted her with respect could be unconditional allies or potential enemies. And above all, her husband, the man with whom she had built a life and a family, appeared before her as a stranger. As she walked down the main hallway, adorned with portraits of generations of Hamiltons, she stopped in front of the most imposing picture. Alexander Hamilton, her husband, portrayed as the savior of the dynasty, the visionary who had multiplied the family fortune. The painting, commissioned just 5 years earlier to commemorate the 20 years of his leadership, now seemed to her a monumental mockery. If what Ernest said was true, that portrait celebrated not merit, but deception. That night during the family dinner, Catherine observed Alexander carefully. His calculated movements, his way of speaking with unquestionable authority, his manner of referring to the company's achievements as if they were exclusively his. How had she not noticed these details before? Perhaps because she was too busy, being the perfect wife, the ideal hostess, the exemplary mother. Or perhaps because, as happens in great families with empires to defend, she had learned not to ask uncomfortable questions. Sebastian, seated beside her, ate distractedly while playing with his phone under the table. "How was your riding lesson today?" Catherine asked casually, seeking to confirm what she had seen that morning. The boy looked up, surprised. "How did you know? It was supposed to be a secret between Ryan and me." Alexander immediately stopped eating. "What riding lesson? I don't recall authorizing that." The silence that followed Sebastian's innocent revelation was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Catherine observed how her husband's face went from surprise to indignation, and finally to forced indifference. "We'll talk about this later," Alexander decreed, resuming his usual controlling stance. But Catherine did not miss the brief exchange of glances between her husband and Ryan, who was every night discreetly supervised security from a corner of the dining room. There was something in that look, a mixture of reproach and warning that confirmed her suspicions. The relationship between these two men went far beyond the professional. They shared secrets that now, for some reason, Ryan seemed willing to transmit to Sebastian. That night, while Alexander worked in his office as usual, Catherine decided to take a risk. She headed to the security office, located in a discreet wing of the ranch. She knew that at this hour Ryan was making his nightly rounds of the property. The door was closed, but not locked. With her heart beating strongly, she entered and closed it behind her. The room was austere, functional, without personal decorations except for a framed photograph. Ryan, much younger, next to Alexander, at what appeared to be an official ceremony. Both smiled at the camera, but their eyes reflected something deeper than a simple working relationship. Catherine had always assumed that Ryan was just another employee, hired for his skills. Now she understood that their bond came from much earlier. She quickly went to the filing cabinet. She needed to find the security records mentioned by the retired employee, documents that could confirm what Ernest had told her. The first drawer contained routine reports, nothing relevant. The second was empty. The third was locked. Frustrated, she was about to give up when she noticed a detail. The bottom of the second drawer seemed less deep than the others. After careful examination, she discovered a false bottom. She removed it and found a folder worn by time with a simple title, Case S 2004. The initial coincided with Sullivan, the advisor mentioned by Ernest. With trembling hands, she opened the folder. It contained several documents, copies of contracts with handwritten notes pointing out irregularities, photographs of meetings where Alexander appeared with businessmen of dubious reputation, and a detailed report on Charles Sullivan's sudden departure from the company. It didn't mention his destination, only that he had been neutralized as a threat. The last page was a letter signed by Ryan, addressed to Alexander. Everything has been handled as agreed. Your path is clear. The old man will end up yielding to the evidence I have presented him. As for E, we can deal with him if he interferes, but I don't think he will. His weakness has always been his sense of honor. Catherine felt nauseated. The evidence was clear. Her husband had orchestrated an elaborate plan to displace his brother from the succession, using Ryan as the executor. But what had really happened to Charles Sullivan? And more importantly, why did Ryan keep these compromising documents? Was it a way to ensure against possible betrayals, or did he have other plans? The sound of approaching footsteps alerted her. She quickly photographed the documents with her phone, returned everything to its place, and exited through the back door just as Ryan entered through the main one. The next morning, Catherine got up early and headed into town. She needed to talk to someone who could help her understand the legal implications of what she had discovered. Melissa Lopez, her college friend and now a prestigious lawyer, was the only person she could trust for something so delicate. They met in a discreet cafe in downtown Bourbon Springs, far from the social circles frequented by families like the Hamiltons. "What you're telling me is very serious, Kat," said Melissa, after listening attentively and reviewing the photographs. "If these documents are authentic, Alexander could face serious legal consequences, not to mention the public scandal that would destroy the company's reputation." Catherine nodded, aware of the implications. "What I don't understand is why Ryan is approaching Sebastian now. What is he planning?" Melissa reflected for a moment. "Perhaps he feels remorse, or maybe he's preparing his next move. In any case, you must be extremely careful. These men have proven they are capable of anything to protect their interests." Back at the ranch, Catherine noticed something unusual, an unknown car parked by the main entrance. As she approached, she saw a man conversing animatedly with Alexander on the porch. Her husband seemed tense, although he tried to maintain a cordial smile. The visitor, a man in his 50s, well-dressed and with an air of undeniable authority, seemed vaguely familiar to her. When Catherine approached, Alexander introduced her quickly. "Darling, let me introduce you to Jason Mitchell, our new financial advisor." The name immediately set off alarms for Catherine. Mitchell was Charles Sullivan's brother-in-law. It couldn't be a coincidence. During dinner, Jason was charming and knowledgeable about the bourbon business. He spoke of expansion projects, international markets, and the importance of maintaining the family legacy. But Catherine caught the uneasy glances that Alexander and Ryan exchanged every time Jason mentioned legacy. There was an underlying tension, as if the advisor's words had a double meaning that only they understood. After dinner, when Jason retired to the guest room, Alexander called an urgent meeting with Ryan in his office. Catherine, pretending to go to bed, silently slipped to the half-open door. How the hell did that man get here? she heard Alexander say, his voice trembling with contained rage. "He says the board of directors hired him," Ryan replied. "But we know that's impossible without your approval. Someone is moving pieces against us," Alexander continued. "First those rumors in the financial sector, then the shareholders' questions about old contracts, and now this. Sullivan's brother-in-law appearing out of nowhere, 20 years later." "Do you think he knows something?" Ryan asked. "I don't. No, but we can't risk it. If he starts digging in the archives, I'll make sure he doesn't find anything compromising," Ryan assured. "Meanwhile, we need to find out who's behind all this." Catherine moved away silently, her mind processing this new information. Someone else was investigating Alexander. Someone with enough power to infiltrate a man into the family business. Could it be Ernest? Or were there more people interested in unearthing the Hamilton secrets? What was clear was that Jason Mitchell's arrival represented a direct threat to Alexander and Ryan, and by extension, to the entire family. The next day, Catherine decided to approach Jason under the pretext of showing him the ranch. As they walked through the fields of blue rye that stretched as far as the eye could see, she tried to subtly probe him. "The world of finance must be fascinating, Mr. Mitchell. Have you always worked in this sector?" Jason smiled enigmatically. "I've had a diverse career, Mrs. Hamilton, but let's say I have a special interest in family businesses with complex histories." The way he emphasized those last words made it clear he wasn't there by chance. "My brother-in-law worked for a similar company years ago. Unfortunately, he discovered irregularities that cost him his career. Since then, I've dedicated myself to advising companies to prevent similar situations." The message was crystal clear. Jason knew what had happened to Charles Sullivan and was there to settle scores. As they continued the tour, Catherine noticed that Ryan was following them at a distance, pretending to supervise the workers, but clearly monitoring Jason's every move. The tension was palpable. "And your son, Mrs. Hamilton?" Jason suddenly asked. "I understand he will be the heir to all this someday." Catherine tensed at the mention of Sebastian. "That's right, although he's still very young to think about such great responsibilities." Jason nodded thoughtfully. "It's important that young heirs know the true history of their families, don't you think? Secrets have an unpleasant way of coming to light at the most inopportune moments." Back in the main house, Catherine found Sebastian in the library, unusually focused on an old book of family history. "What are you reading with such interest?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Ryan told me I should know my ancestors better," the boy replied without looking up. "He told me that some family members had to make difficult decisions to protect the legacy." Catherine sat next to her son, alarmed by the evident indoctrination. "What else has Ryan told you?" Sebastian finally looked at her, and there was a seriousness improper for a child his age in his eyes. "He told me that someday I'll understand why some people do bad things for good reasons, and that when I'm older, I'll have to decide what kind of Hamilton I want to be." That night, while everyone slept, Catherine decided to take another risk. She headed stealthily to Jason's office, hoping to find some clue about his true intentions. The door was closed, but she remembered where Alexander kept the master keys. She had barely entered when a voice startled her. "Looking for answers, I suppose." Jason was sitting in an armchair in the darkest corner of the room, as if he had been waiting for her. "Don't be alarmed, Mrs. Hamilton. I believe we both want the same thing, the truth." Catherine, recovering from her surprise, decided to be direct. "What do you know about what happened to Charles Sullivan?" Jason rose slowly. "Enough to destroy everything your husband has built. But the more important question is, what are you willing to do with that information?" At that moment, the door burst open. Ryan appeared, his face a mask of contained fury. "The meeting is over," he announced dryly. "Mrs. Hamilton, your husband is looking for you." Catherine knew it was a lie, but she also understood the danger of the situation. She left without protest, but not without exchanging a significant look with Jason. Something had changed. She was no longer alone in her search for the truth, but she couldn't blindly trust this new ally either. As she returned to her rooms, she saw a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. For a second, she thought it was Alexander, but then she recognized the bulkier silhouette, Ernest. What was her brother-in-law doing in the main house at this hour? And how had he entered without being detected? Catherine couldn't sleep that night. The revelations were accumulating like pieces of a macabre puzzle, but something crucial was still missing to complete the picture. Ernest's appearance at the ranch at that hour couldn't be casual. Was he related to Jason Mitchell's arrival? Was he part of a larger plan to destabilize Alexander? And most disturbing, what were Ryan's true intentions toward Sebastian? With the first light of dawn, she made a decision. She needed to speak with Ernest again, this time without beating around the bush. But first, she had to protect her son. Using the pretext of an educational trip, she arranged for Sebastian to spend a few days with his maternal grandmother in Virginia, far from the tensions of the ranch. Alexander, too worried about Jason's presence, raised no objections. When the car carrying Sebastian disappeared down the main road, Catherine felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. Now she could focus on unraveling the truth without fearing for her son's immediate safety. She headed toward the old hunting pavilion, located at the edge of the property, where she had secretly arranged to meet Ernest. The place, semi-abandoned for years, offered the discretion they needed. Her brother-in-law was already waiting, seated in an old leather armchair cracked by time, smoking thoughtfully. "I was beginning to doubt you'd come," he said when he saw her enter. "Things are getting complicated faster than expected." Catherine was direct. "Do you have anything to do with Jason Mitchell's appearance?" Ernest smiled slightly, a gesture that painfully reminded her of Alexander in his best moments. "Let's say I facilitated his hiring through some contacts on the board of directors. But it wasn't my idea. Jason has been looking for an opportunity to infiltrate the company for years. I just opened the door." "Why now?" Catherine pressed. "After so long?" Ernest put out his cigarette before answering. "Because Charles Sullivan has reappeared." The news fell like lightning. According to all indications, Charles had been permanently silenced. His return completely changed the picture. "3 months ago, I received a letter," Ernest continued. "No return address, but I immediately recognized the handwriting. Charles informed me that he was alive, that he had been hiding all these years, but that he now had sufficient evidence to expose not only the irregularities he originally discovered, but the entire web of manipulation that came afterward." Catherine processed this information with amazement. "And where is he now?" "I don't know, for safety reasons. Only Jason maintains contact with him, but soon he will reveal himself. Charles has been gathering information about Alexander's activities for 2 decades, waiting for the perfect moment for his revenge." This revelation generated mixed feelings in Catherine. On one hand, it confirmed her suspicions about her husband's dark past. On the other, the idea of a revenge planned over 20 years terrified her. Not for Alexander, but for the consequences for the entire family, especially for Sebastian. "What exactly do they intend to do?" she asked. Ernest looked at her intensely. "Justice, Catherine. Alexander not only stole my place, he also manipulated contracts, forged signatures, threatened those who stood in his way. He has built an empire on lies. It's time for everything to come to light. And what will happen to the family business, to the employees, to my son?" The concern in her voice was palpable. "Sebastian is not to blame for anything." Ernest softened his expression. "That's why we're talking now. Charles and I agreed that you and Sebastian should be protected. You are as much victims as I am. Alexander has kept you in ignorance all these years." Catherine wasn't so sure. She remembered Ryan's words to her son. "You need to learn to protect those you love, even from those everyone considers heroes." Was he referring to Alexander, or was there something more? "Something doesn't fit," she finally said. "Ryan was key in Alexander's rise to power. He helped him cover everything up. Why does he now seem to be preparing Sebastian for something? Is it part of his plan?" Ernest's expression changed, showing genuine confusion. "Ryan is getting close to Sebastian. That wasn't part of the plan. He's always been Alexander's watchdog. If he's acting on his own, it could complicate everything." This reaction confirmed to Catherine that Ryan had his own agenda, independent of both Alexander and Ernest and Charles's plans. "I need to know More about Ryan, she insisted. What really is his history with Alexander? Why is he so loyal to him? Ernest visibly hesitated before answering. That's a story few know, and I'm not sure I'm the one who should tell it. What I can tell you is that his loyalty to Alexander goes beyond the professional. There's a bond that dates back to long before any of us came on the scene. Frustrated by the evasive answers, Catherine decided to change her approach. What about Jason Mitchell? Can I trust him? To a certain extent, Ernest replied. His main motivation is to avenge his brother-in-law. He'll use you if it serves his purpose, but won't hesitate to sacrifice you if necessary. Be careful what you reveal to him. The conversation had confirmed some of her fears and generated new questions. Before leaving, Ernest handed her a small USB drive. Here are copies of some of the documents Charles has collected. Study them. They'll help you understand the magnitude of what Alexander has done. And remember, don't fully trust anyone, not even me. Back at the main house, Catherine noticed an unusual movement of security personnel. Ryan seemed to have doubled the patrols around the ranch. Had he discovered her meeting with Ernest? Trying to stay calm, she headed to her room, where she could review the contents of the USB in private. But upon entering, she found Alexander waiting for her, sitting in an armchair by the window, with an expression she hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability. "We need to talk, Catherine," he said quietly. "Things are about to get complicated, and I need you to be prepared." For a moment, Catherine considered confronting him directly with what she knew, but her instinct warned her that the time was not yet right. She needed more information, a better understanding of all the pieces on the board before showing her cards. "What is it about, Alexander?" Her husband rose slowly as if carrying an invisible weight. "Jason Mitchell's presence is no coincidence. He comes to collect old debts, to unearth stories that should remain buried." He paused, watching her carefully. "But it's not just him. Someone else is pulling the strings, someone who knows our most intimate secrets." Catherine maintained her composure, though her heart was beating rapidly. "Our secrets? I thought there were no secrets between us." Alexander smiled bitterly. "Everyone has secrets, dear, even you." Those words left her cold. What did Alexander really know about her? 20 years ago, he continued, I made difficult decisions to protect this family, to secure our future. Not all were ethical, I admit, but I always had a motive greater than my personal ambition. He approached her, taking her hands in his. Everything I've done, I did for us, for you, for Sebastian. And now someone wants to destroy it all. The sincerity in his eyes almost convinced her, almost. But she remembered the documents she had seen, Ernest's words, Ryan's strange attitude. What do you expect me to do? She finally asked. I want you to trust me, Alexander replied. To not listen to the lies they will try to tell you. To remember who has been by your side all these years, building a legacy for our son. He released her hands and headed toward the door. And above all, I want you to be careful with Ryan. I'm no longer sure of his loyalty. This last warning surprised her. Did Alexander also distrust Ryan? What had changed in that relationship? When her husband left, Catherine hurried to connect the USB to her computer. The files were organized chronologically, from the initial manipulated contracts to recent company operations. But what caught her attention was a folder titled Personal. It contained documents about Alexander's private life before taking control of the company. And there, among old photographs and press clippings, she found something that would forever change her perception. A birth certificate in the name of Ryan Wilson Hamilton, natural son of William Hamilton, the original patriarch. Ryan was a Hamilton, an illegitimate son never officially recognized, half-brother to Alexander and Ernest. Suddenly, everything made new sense. Ryan's unwavering loyalty to Alexander, his role in the rise to power, even his recent approach to Sebastian. He wasn't just the head of security, he was part of the family with potential claims to the Hamilton legacy. Would Sebastian know this? Had Ryan told him about their true relationship? And most importantly, what was he planning now that the foundations of the family empire were being threatened? As she reflected on these revelations, a sound alerted her. Footsteps in the hallway, approaching her door. She quickly hid the USB and closed her computer. The footsteps stopped in front of her room, but no one knocked. After a few eternal seconds, they continued moving away. Catherine approached silently and opened the door just in time to see Jason Mitchell turning the corner of the hallway, heading toward the wing where Alexander's office was located. The pieces continued to move in this dangerous game, and she was just beginning to understand the true rules. That night, during dinner, the tension was palpable. Alexander maintained a forced conversation with Jason about future company projects, as if he wasn't aware of his true intentions. Ryan, from his usual position near the door, observed everything with an inscrutable expression. And Catherine, now aware of the multiple levels of deception surrounding her, tried to decipher the underground currents of power flowing at that table. Sebastian's absence was, paradoxically, both a relief and a concern. At least he was far from this web of intrigue. But for how long could she protect him? "I've been reviewing the historical archives of the company," Jason commented casually, while savoring his wine. "It's fascinating how some seemingly insignificant decisions end up defining the destiny of an entire dynasty." Alexander maintained his composure, though Catherine noticed how his knuckles whitened around his glass. "Business history is always instructive," he responded with a tense smile, "although I prefer to focus on the future. The past, after all, cannot be changed." "Oh, I'm not so sure about that," replied Jason with an enigmatic smile. "The past has surprising ways of rewriting itself when new truths emerge." His eyes briefly shifted towards Ryan before returning to Alexander. "By the way, I've noticed your son is not with us tonight. A shame. I understood he was beginning to take an interest in the family business." The mention of Sebastian put all of Catherine's senses on alert. "He's visiting his grandmother," she intervened, trying to sound casual. "We believe in the importance of family bonds." Jason nodded, but there was something disturbing in his gaze. "Family bonds are fundamental, no doubt, especially those that remain hidden." This time, he looked directly at Ryan, who visibly tensed. The message was clear. Jason also knew the secret of his birth. The atmosphere became suffocating. Alexander, catching the subtext, hurried to change the subject, but the damage was done. The masks were beginning to fall, and no one at that table could continue pretending ignorance much longer. The next morning dawned with unexpected news. Ernest had been seen openly entering the ranch without the stealth of his previous visits. Catherine watched from her bedroom window as her brother-in-law shook hands with several members of the board of directors, who surprisingly had also been summoned. Something big was about to happen. She didn't need to be a fortune teller to understand that the conflicting forces were converging, preparing for a definitive confrontation. Determined not to be a pawn in this game, she quickly dressed and went down to join the improvised meeting. The grand hall of the ranch, usually reserved for family celebrations, had been transformed into an improvised boardroom. Alexander presided over the table with apparent calm, though Catherine could perceive the tension in each of his gestures. To his right, Ryan remained standing, more like a bodyguard than a head of security. On the other side, Ernest and Jason Mitchell occupied prominent places, flanked by several veteran board members who seemed disconcerted by the urgency of the summons. "Now that we're all here," Alexander began in a controlled voice, "perhaps our guests would like to explain the reason for this intervention." Ernest rose with dignity. After years living in the shadow of his younger brother, he seemed to have recovered the authority that corresponded to him by birth. "The reason is simple, Alexander. For too long, this company has operated under false premises. It's time for the truth to come to light." He took out a thick file and placed it on the Mao table. "These documents demonstrate how you manipulated contracts, forged signatures, and threatened those who stood in your way to take control of the family business. All orchestrated with the help of your loyal collaborator." His gaze briefly shifted toward Ryan, who remained impassive. Murmurs of astonishment ran through the table. Alexander maintained his composure, though the pulsing vein in his temple betrayed his contained fury. Serious accusations, brother. I hope you have substantial evidence, or I'll be forced to take legal action for defamation. Oh, we have more. Insufficient evidence, Jason intervened, extracting a tablet from his briefcase, including the testimony of the man you tried to silence 20 years ago. He touched the screen, and the aged but unmistakable face of Charles Sullivan appeared. A collective gasp ran through the room. It was like seeing a materialized ghost. "Good morning, everyone," Charles greeted from the screen. "I regret not being able to be physically present, but circumstances oblige me to maintain a certain safety distance." His voice sounded firm, without a trace of the fear one might expect from someone who had spent 2 decades in hiding. "What you are going to hear today will forever change your perception of the Hamilton dynasty. I don't come motivated by personal revenge, but by a sense of justice too long postponed." For the next hour, Charles meticulously detailed each of the manipulations, threats, and forgeries orchestrated by Alexander, with dates, names, and documentary evidence that Jason distributed among the board members. Catherine observed the reactions, initial incredulity followed by growing indignation. Some board members, visibly affected, began to physically distance themselves from Alexander, as if his mere proximity contaminated them. "What our distinguished virtual guest forgets to mention," Alexander finally intervened, recovering some of his usual aplomb, "is the context of those decisions. The company was on the brink of ruin. My father, with all due respect to his memory, had brought our legacy to the precipice with disastrous investments. And my brother," he looked directly at Ernest, "lacked the vision and strength necessary to save what generations of Hamiltons had built." "And that justifies the treatment of Charles Sullivan?" asked one of the oldest board members, a man who had known the original patriarch. "We all assumed he had voluntarily moved to Colorado." "I never set foot on Colorado soil," Charles clarified from the screen. "I spent 3 years hiding in a remote town in Montana, fearing for my life, before I could discreetly settle in Argentina with a new identity, all thanks to the very explicit threats from your head of security." All eyes then turned to Ryan, who for the first time seemed uncomfortable under the collective scrutiny. "I acted following orders," Ryan declared coldly, "as I have always done." "Whose orders, exactly?" Jason pressed. "Because according to our sources, you maintain a relationship with the Hamilton family that goes beyond the professional." A sepulchral silence fell over the room. Catherine held her breath, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. Ryan briefly looked at Alexander, as if asking permission, before responding, "I am the natural son of William Hamilton, half-brother to Alexander and Ernest, a fact my father never officially recognized, but which everyone present at this table has known or suspected for years." This public confirmation of what until then had been an open secret provoked a new wave of murmurs. Catherine observed how the expression of several board members went from surprise to understanding. Suddenly, many past decisions acquired a new meaning. "But that doesn't explain your unwavering loyalty to Alexander," Ernest pointed out. "After all, he kept you in the shadows while benefiting from your service." Ryan gave a bitter smile. "My loyalty was never to Alexander." This statement surprised even Alexander himself, who turned abruptly toward his head of security. "My loyalty," Ryan continued, "has always been to the true interests of the Hamilton family, and 20 years ago, that meant preventing people like Charles Sullivan from destroying what had cost us so much to build." "People like me?" Charles intervened, visibly indignant. "I was only trying to prevent massive fraud." "You were trying to use privileged information for personal benefit," Ryan replied harshly. "Oh, don't be so surprised. I have copies of your communications with direct competitors of the Hamiltons, offering them details about our internal operations in exchange for an executive position. Your moral indignation always had a price, Charles." This unexpected revelation momentarily destabilized the united front that Ernest and Jason had presented. Charles, from the screen, stammered a denial that sounded unconvincing. "Interesting twist," Alexander commented, regaining some confidence. "It seems our accusers have their own secrets, sir." He addressed the board members. "Everything I've done, even the ethically questionable decisions, has been to protect and strengthen this company. The results speak for themselves. We've tripled profits, expanded markets, generated employment for hundreds of families. So are you going to destroy all that because of personal vendettas and ambitions? His argument seemed to resonate with some of those present, who nodded slightly, but Ernest was not willing to give ground. No one denies your business achievements, Alexander, but they were built on a lie, and that lie is poisoning the future of the next generation. He turned to Catherine. Do you want Sebastian to inherit not just a company, but also its secrets and conflicts? Catherine, who until then had remained silent, absorbing each new revelation, felt all eyes converge on her. Her position as the accused's wife and the heir's mother gave her special weight in this family dispute. Before she could respond, the door to the hall burst open, revealing the last person she expected to see, Sebastian. Her son, who was supposed to be safe in Virginia, advanced with determined steps to the center of the room. At 13, he showed a maturity inappropriate for his age, accentuated by the evident weight of what he was witnessing. You don't need to discuss my future anymore, he declared in a clear voice. I've heard enough. Catherine rose alarmed. Sebastian, what are you doing here? You should be with your grandmother. I came back last night, the boy explained. Ryan picked me up. He said it was important for me to be present today. The revelation provoked expressions of astonishment. Alexander looked at his head of security with evident betrayal in his eyes. You brought my son without my knowledge, without his mother's consent. Ryan didn't flinch. Sebastian has a right to know the truth about his family. All the secrets, all the lies. It's the only way he'll be able to make informed decisions when his time comes. He approached the young man and placed a hand on his shoulder in a surprisingly paternal gesture. I've been teaching him not only to ride horses, but to recognize who his allies and enemies really are. The scene had something surreal about it. The guardian of family secrets now presenting himself as the heir's mentor. Catherine, recovering from the initial surprise, advanced toward her son. Sebastian, this is too complex for you to understand right now. There are nuances, there are... No, Mom, the young man interrupted firmly. I'm not a child. I've seen how Dad has lied to you for years. I've seen documents. I've heard conversations. I know that. Our name, our legacy, was built on questionable decisions. He turned to Alexander. I also know that you did it believing it was best for everyone. But lies have consequences, Dad. And it's time to face them. The maturity in his words momentarily left everyone speechless. Even Charles from the screen seemed impressed by the young heir's intervention. If I may, Sebastian continued, taking advantage of the silence, I believe there's a solution that could satisfy all parties. He looked at his uncle Ernest. You're right that the truth must come to light. But my father is also right that destroying the company benefits no one. He then addressed the board members. I propose a complete restructuring. My father will resign from the presidency, publicly acknowledge his past mistakes, and a trust will be established to ensure proper administration until I come of age. Then he looked at Ryan. And you will be officially recognized as a Hamilton, with all the rights that implies. The proposal, surprisingly mature and equitable, left everyone reflecting. And who would administer this trust? One of the board members finally asked. A committee formed by representatives of all parties involved, Sebastian replied, without hesitation. My uncle Ernest, my mother, 2 members of the current board and Ryan, 5 people, decisions by simple majority. The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected solution. Catherine observed her son with a mixture of pride and concern. When had he matured so much? And what exact role had Ryan played in that transformation? It's an interesting proposal, Ernest conceded after a long silence. But how do we know your father will fulfill his part? He has proven to be an expert at manipulating situations to his advantage. Before Alexander could respond, Ryan intervened. Because I will personally ensure that he does. The tone left no room for doubt. It was not an offer of help, but a veiled warning. For 20 years I've been the guardian of Alexander's secrets. I know every paper, every conversation, every questionable decision. If he tries to sabotage this agreement, everything will come to light. Everything. The threat hung in the air, heavy and unequivocal. Alexander, cornered, looked around. Board members who doubted him, his own son proposing his resignation, his head of security and half-brother openly threatening him. But above all, he saw Catherine. In her eyes there was no hatred or triumph, just an immense sadness for what could have been and wasn't. "I accept the terms," he finally said, "with one condition. I want it noted that everything I did, thinking of the welfare of this family, even my mistakes." Sebastian nodded solemnly. "It will be so noted, Dad." The rest of the meeting was devoted to formalizing the details of the agreement. Charles, from his remote connection, agreed to withdraw any legal action in exchange for financial compensation and a public apology. Jason Mitchell, seeing the main objective of his mission fulfilled, showed unexpected flexibility in the negotiations. The board members, relieved to avoid a major scandal that would have destroyed the company's reputation, unanimously supported Sebastian's proposal. At the end of the meeting, as everyone began to disperse, Catherine noticed that Ryan remained by the window, observing the fields of rye that stretched to the horizon. She approached him, needing answers to the questions that still tormented her. "Why, Ryan, why did you help Alexander all these years, knowing what he had done, and why are you changing sides now?" Ryan kept his gaze on the landscape as he answered, "I never changed sides, Catherine. I've always been on the side of this land, of this legacy." He paused before continuing. "When I helped Alexander take control, I did it because at that moment he was the best option. Ernest was weak, manipulable. And Charles, well, you've seen he wasn't the saint he claimed to be." "And now?" Catherine pressed. "Why approach Sebastian? Behind Alexander's back?" Ryan finally looked at her directly. "Because I saw in your son what I never saw in Alexander or Ernest, true integrity. The ability to understand the weight of difficult decisions without losing his moral compass. Sebastian will be the Hamilton this family has been waiting for generations." He paused, and for the first time Catherine glimpsed vulnerability in his eyes. "And because I'm tired, Catherine, tired of living in the shadows, of being the unrecognized brother, the guardian of secrets that poison me," Sebastian offered me what no one else did. The opportunity to finally be part of this family, not as a loyal employee, but as who I really am. His words resonated deeply with Catherine. She understood that in his twisted way, Ryan had always acted for what he considered the greater good. And now, like her, he saw in Sebastian the hope for a future where the mistakes of the past could be redeemed. As she returned to the main house, she saw her son conversing calmly with Ernest. The image gave her a strange feeling of hope. Perhaps, after all, from the ashes of so many lies, something authentic could emerge. Perhaps the Hamilton legacy, finally freed from the weight of its secrets, could transform into something they could all truly be proud of. 6 months had passed since that meeting that forever changed the destiny of the Hamilton family. Crossley Valley Ranch shone under the setting sun as it prepared for a special ceremony. The fields of rye, silent witnesses to generations of family secrets, extended majestically as far as the eye could see. Catherine observed from the main terrace how guests began to arrive. Board members, business partners, veteran employees, all taking part in this historic moment. The official presentation of Sebastian as the future heir of the Hamilton dynasty and the inauguration of the new administrative board that would manage the family legacy until he came of age. The last few months had not been easy. The transition of power generated uncertainty in the markets and tensions within the family itself. Alexander, true to his word, had resigned from the presidency, though not without some initial resistance. The first weeks were especially difficult, with constant discussions about the exact terms of the agreement and the limits of his new position as advisor. But gradually, perhaps understanding that this was the only way to preserve something of the legacy that had cost him so much to build, he began to collaborate more constructively. Now he occupied a discreet place in the second row of seats, observing with an indecipherable expression the preparations for the ceremony. Ernest, for his part, had assumed a crucial role in the administrative committee, contributing his experience and international contacts. His relationship with Alexander remained tense, but they had established a professional truce for the common good. Most surprising had been his approach to Sebastian. Uncle and nephew had developed a genuine bond, spending long afternoons discussing family history and the complexities of the bourbon business. Catherine now saw them animatedly conversing by the central fountain, Sebastian listening attentively while Ernest gestured emphatically, probably explaining some anecdote from the old days. The most significant change, however, had been Ryan's. After the official recognition of his status as William Hamilton's natural son, he had undergone a visible transformation. He was no longer the somber man who lurked in the shadows, but a respected member of the administrative committee whose opinion was valued both for his deep knowledge of the company and for his unwavering commitment to the family legacy. He continued to maintain his position as head of security, but now did so with the dignity of someone who has finally found his legitimate place. His relationship with Sebastian had strengthened. More than a mentor, he had become a kind of second father to the young man, teaching him not only practical skills, but also the ethical nuances he should consider as a future leader. "He's unrecognizable, isn't he?" said a voice beside her. Catherine turned to find Melissa Lopez, her lawyer friend, who had been instrumental during the family agreement negotiations. "Ryan, I mean. I've never seen him smile so much." Catherine nodded. Public recognition has healed very old wounds, but what's really transformed him is his relationship with Sebastian. Melissa observed the young man, who was now politely greeting several board members. "Your son is extraordinary, Kat. The way he handled this whole situation. There are adults with decades of experience who wouldn't have shown such maturity and balance. Sometimes I wonder if we didn't rob him of part of his childhood," Catherine confessed with a touch of sadness. "He had to grow up too quickly in the face of all these revelations." Melissa gently squeezed her hand. "Children are more resilient than we think, and Sebastian has something special. A natural understanding of people and their motivations. He'll be a great leader someday." As they spoke, they noticed the arrival of a discreet car from which Jason Mitchell descended. After the meeting, he had maintained a low profile, limiting himself to ensuring that Charles Sullivan received the agreed compensation and then retreating to the background. His presence today as an official guest symbolized the definitive closure of old wounds. The ceremony began punctually at sunset. The central courtyard of the ranch had been decorated with elegant sobriety, white flowers, soft lights, and the family crest presiding over the main stage. Ernest, as the oldest member of the committee, was in charge of welcoming everyone and introducing the new administrative model. His speech, measured and conciliatory, emphasized the continuity of the family legacy and the importance of learning from past mistakes. "Today we celebrate not just a change in the structure of our company," he concluded, "but the rebirth of the fundamental values that should always have guided us: integrity, transparency, and responsibility toward our roots." When the time came for Sebastian's official presentation, all eyes turned to the young man who, having just turned 13, mounted the stage with a mixture of nervousness and determination. He wore a formal suit that accentuated his growing resemblance to his father, but his expression reflected a warmth and honesty that were entirely his own. "I thank you for the trust you have placed in me," he began in a clear voice that barely trembled. "I am aware of the weight of tradition that our name carries, but also of the mistakes we have made as a family." He paused, and his gaze slowly traveled over those present, briefly stopping on his father, on Ryan, on his uncle, and finally on Catherine. "What I learned these months is that true legacy is not measured in acres of rye or in signed contracts, but in the integrity with which we face our challenges. My commitment today is to build on foundations of truth, no matter how painful it may be." Spontaneous and prolonged applause followed his words. Catherine observed with pride how her son received recognition not only from family members, but also from veteran employees who had served the Hamiltons for decades. Even Alexander, from his discreet position, applauded with sincere admiration. It was evident that despite the circumstances, he felt genuine pride in his son. After the formal presentation, they proceeded to sign the definitive agreement that established the administrative committee and its responsibilities until Sebastian came of age. One by one, the 5 designated members stamped their signature, Ernest, Catherine, two veteran board members selected for their proven integrity, and finally Ryan, whose signature, now officially as Ryan Wilson Hamilton, definitively sealed this new chapter in family history. The reception that followed flowed with a warmth that the ranch had not experienced in years. Guests circulated freely, mixing without the usual hierarchical barriers. Catherine was conversing with a group of board members' wives when she noticed Alexander discreetly heading toward a more secluded area of the garden. Intrigued, she followed, at a prudent distance. She found him sitting on an ancient stone bench, contemplatively regarding the statue of the dynasty's founder. "I didn't mean to interrupt your moment of reflection," she said, approaching. Alexander looked up, surprised, but not bothered by her presence. "I was just trying to imagine what my grandfather would think of all this," he replied with a melancholic smile. "He'd probably be furious with my mistakes, but proud of Sebastian." Catherine sat next to him, maintaining a certain distance. Despite the forced cohabitation during the last few months, it was the first time they had really talked since the revelation of his secrets. "You did many things wrong, Alexander," she finally said. "You deceived us all for years. But today you have accepted the consequences with dignity. That also counts for something." He nodded slowly. "It was never my intention to hurt you or Sebastian. I sincerely believe that protecting the secret was protecting you both." He paused, seeking the right words. "Power is addictive, Catherine. Once you taste it, once you feel how the decisions you make affect hundreds of people, it's hard to imagine a life without it. I became a slave to my own ambition." "Do you regret it?" she asked, studying his face for signs of manipulation. To her surprise, what she saw was genuine contrition. "I regret the lies, the methods," he replied after a moment of reflection. "But I can't regret everything. We built something important together. We saved the company from ruin. We created opportunities for many people." He looked toward where Sebastian was animatedly conversing with a group of young businessmen. "And above all, we made that extraordinary young man. Whatever happens between us, I will always be proud to be his father." The sincerity in his voice moved Catherine more than she would have wanted to admit. For a moment, she glimpsed the man she had fallen in love with so many years ago, before power and secrets transformed him. "Time will tell what remains of our marriage, Alexander," she finally said, rising. "For now, let's focus on supporting Sebastian and making this transition work for everyone." He nodded, understanding that it was the most he could hope for right now. As Catherine walked away, Ryan approached. The two men, once so close in their shared secrets, observed each other with a mixture of wariness and recognition. "A successful event," Ryan commented, breaking the ice. "The boy has done extraordinarily well." Alexander nodded. "He has the best of all of us. Your instinct, Catherine's intelligence, even some of Ernest's diplomacy." He paused before adding, "and hopefully the best of me too." Ryan sat where Catherine had been. "You know, for years I hated and admired you in equal parts," he confessed with unusual frankness. "I hated being relegated to the shadows, being the unrecognized brother. But I admired your determination, your vision." Alexander looked at him with surprise. They had never spoken so openly about their relationship. "I always knew you were more loyal to the Hamilton name than to me personally," he replied. "And now I understand why. You carry our blood. You had as much right as any of us." Ryan shook his head. "It wasn't about rights. It was about belonging, about identity. All my life I've served this family from the shadows, knowing I would never be fully accepted. And now you are," Alexander concluded, "thanks to Sebastian." Both directed their gaze toward the young man, who was now receiving instructions from Ernest on some business protocol. "He sees possibilities where we only saw obstacles," Ryan reflected. "He's not trapped in our old grudges and ambitions." He stood up, smoothing his suit. "That's why I chose him, Alexander, because he represents what this family could have always been, if we hadn't been so busy fighting among ourselves." Without waiting for a response, he walked away to join the TUI main group, leaving Alexander with his thoughts. Ryan's frankness had been like a merciless mirror, reflecting truths he had avoided facing for decades. Meanwhile, in the center of the courtyard, Sebastian was the undisputed protagonist. Despite his youth, he moved with surprising naturalness among groups of adults, listening attentively, asking pertinent questions, showing a mastery of business topics that impressed veterans in the sector. Catherine observed him with a mixture of pride and amazement. When had he grown so much? At what moment had that shy child transformed into this self-assured young man? The answer, she understood, was in the events of recent months. Crises not only reveal character, they also forge it, and Sebastian had emerged from this test stronger, wiser, more complete. At the end of the evening, when most of the guests had departed, the entire Hamilton family, Alexander, Catherine, Sebastian, Ernest, and now also Ryan, gathered for an official photograph. It was the first time they would all appear together in a family portrait. The photographer arranged them in front of the main entrance of the ranch, with the family crest carved in stone above their heads. "A genuine smile, please," he requested while adjusting his equipment. "This is a historic moment." And it was, Catherine thought. Not for the photograph itself, but for what it represented. The end of a cycle of lies and the beginning of a new era for the Hamiltons. An era based, for the first time in decades, on truth. When the flash illuminated their faces, Catherine had an absolute certainty. The path would not be easy, old habits and resentments would not disappear overnight. There would be difficult days, arguments, perhaps even new crises. But something fundamental had changed. The secrets that once poisoned, family relationships were now exposed to the light, thus losing much of their destructive power. And Sebastian, with his surprising maturity and conciliatory vision, would be the bridge between the turbulent past and a more transparent future. The next day, while quietly having breakfast on the terrace, Catherine received unexpected news. Jason Mitchell had submitted his resignation as financial advisor, leaving a letter explaining that, having fulfilled his mission of establishing the truth, he considered his presence no longer necessary. Most surprising was the postscript. Charles Sullivan sent his best wishes for the future of the company, and especially for Sebastian, the only Hamilton, according to his words, who has demonstrated true nobility. The vindication was complete. Even those who had been victims of the family's deceptions now recognized the value of the new path undertaken. Weeks later, life at Crossley Valley Ranch had found a new rhythm. The administrative committee functioned with surprising harmony, each member contributing their particular strengths. Ernest handled international relations, taking advantage of his extensive contacts in Europe and the United States. Ryan supervised internal operations and security. Now, with the official authority he had always deserved, the two veteran board members contributed their technical and financial expertise, and Catherine had become the conciliatory voice, the one who maintained balance between factions when disagreements arose. Alexander, for his part, had found an unexpected purpose in his new role as advisor. Freed from the pressures of the executive presidency, he could concentrate on what he truly enjoyed: innovation in distillation processes and the development of new premium bourbon varieties. His knowledge of the product was indisputable, and soon even the most skeptical on the board recognized the value of his technical contributions. Sebastian spent hours with him in the distillery, absorbing knowledge that only experience could provide. This new dynamic, focused on the transmission of knowledge rather than the exercise of power, had brought father and son closer again. One afternoon, as Catherine was reviewing correspondence in the office she now officially occupied as a committee member, Sebastian entered with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, can I ask you a question?" She nodded, setting aside the documents. "Do you think people can really change? I mean fundamentally change, not just in appearance." The question, so philosophical for someone his age, didn't surprise Catherine. Her son had always shown unusual depth. "I think they can evolve," she replied after reflecting. "When we face the consequences of our actions, when we see the impact our decisions have on others, we can choose a different path." Sebastian nodded, processing the answer. "That's what I see in Dad. There are moments when he seems truly remorseful, when I see the man he must have been before. before everything that happened. He paused before continuing. Ryan says we all carry within us the capacity for both greatness and pettiness, that the important thing isn't avoiding mistakes, but how we respond to them. Catherine smiled at the wisdom of those words. Ryan has traveled a long road to reach that understanding, and he's right. Your father made serious mistakes, but now he's trying to make amends in his own way. That's already a beginning. Sebastian approached the window, contemplating the fields where the rye grew that would someday be transformed into the bourbon that would bear his signature. Sometimes I think about Grandpa William, he confessed, about how his decisions continue to affect us all. If he had recognized Ryan as a legitimate son from the beginning, perhaps this whole story would have been different. Catherine joined him by the window. Life is full of those what-ifs, son, but we can't change the past, only learn from it to build a better future. She placed a hand on his shoulder, noting how much he had grown in recent months. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're turning the mistakes of previous generations into valuable lessons. That night, at the family dinner, Catherine observed the Hamilton men gathered around the table. Alexander, Ernest, Ryan, Sebastian. Each with their strengths and weaknesses, with their wounds and aspirations. For too long, their differences had been a source of division and conflict. Now, thanks to Sebastian's catalyzing intervention, they were beginning to complement each other, to function as a true family. Not a perfect family, those only existed in the soap operas Sebastian's maternal grandmother so enjoyed, but a real one, with its scars, its pending challenges, and above all, with a new opportunity to redefine itself. As dessert was served, Sebastian proposed a toast to the Hamilton family, not for what it was, not even for what it is now, but for what it can become. Everyone raised their glasses, even the employees serving the table, exceptionally invited to join the toast. In that simple gesture was implicit the deepest change, the break with old hierarchies, the recognition that everyone, from the most direct family member to the humblest worker, formed part of the legacy that deserved to be preserved and improved. Catherine, observing the sincere smiles that illuminated faces once hardened by mistrust, knew that the true inheritance Sebastian would receive would not only be a prosperous company, but the rediscovered values of a dynasty that had finally found its way back to integrity. The late afternoon light filtered through the large windows, bathing the scene in golden and orange tones, colors that recalled the bourbon itself that had sustained generations of Hamiltons. Outside, the fields of blue rye extended as far as the eye could see, silent witnesses to a centuries-old history that was now beginning a new chapter. A chapter written not with secrets and manipulations, but with the indelible ink of truth. Dear listeners, we hope the story of the Hamiltons has moved you and made you reflect on the transformative power of truth and redemption. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore complex family ties and the secrets we all keep. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this narrative about the Hamiltons and their ranch, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships, ethical dilemmas, and the path to personal redemption. What would you do in Catherine's position? Or perhaps you identify more with Ryan, struggling to find his legitimate place.